So tonight we have a little different class. So we're going to start with this piece of wood, and we're going to work on making a tanto out of it. A couple of things you want to look at is look for defects in the wood, like here's a crack that's down from here. So if we're going to use something on this end, we have to stay away from that area cut back here. On this side, we have some nice flowy grain, right, that flows around this knot area. We have to avoid the knot area, but we can use the grain to our advantage because the curve of the weapon generally has follows something like this. So this is conducive to the curvature in a weapon. So we can take an existing tanto, right, and use that as a pattern and see how that, this one's fairly straight, but the one we're going to do is going to have a little more curve to it since the grain is already going that way anyway. All right. The reason we would want to follow this grain is to see how it's rising up this way. If we go really straight, every one of these is going to be a different intersection point and kind of want to pull off. So as we carve, if we go along that grain boundary, then you'll have less defects and delamination areas for when it gets struck or hit, or just time takes its toll, right, where it's going to start to want to peel up. Right, so we'll come in and we'll create a shape around that. So let me do that real quick. Okay, so we have a rough shape sketched onto here. That's just used good old teacher's chalk here. It doesn't affect the wood in any way. It's easily cleaned off. All right, so this is a rough sketch. So we're going to cut proud of these lines. In other words, we're going to cut and leave extra material that we're going to carve away. So I'm going to use a bandsaw because I have one, but you could use a series of straight saws and something called a coping saw, which allows you to go around curves very easily. So it would take a little longer, but we're going to use that. So a little bit easier. So give me a sec. Okay, as you can see, we cut this on the bandsaw. Now, Rome wasn't built in a day, and just like anything else, you have to take things in baby steps. Pieces were cut off in sections so you can follow the curve more safely. And we're left with a very rough shape, and that's okay because we're going to use some hand tools in order to refine that shape. I'm not doing anything yet with this section, this cross section. I want to leave as much of this as flat as I can, as long as I can, so that I can hold it in a vise, which you'll see here shortly. Okay, first couple notes on some tooling. Do not underestimate the power of the pencil. And simple scribing tools like this compass here. All right. So what you want to do is make sure you mark accurately. Sorry for the ability to focus here. Mark accurately a center line along the length all the way around the piece. That'll give you a reference to work from. There's a better focus there. All right. If you have a silver pencil, it shows up on darker woods a little better, but a regular pencil will work as well. And then let's go through some of these tools. You don't have to have all of these, but if you have one or more, you can work with them a little more quickly. All right, so this is a draw knife. So basically a blade that you use pulled towards you. This tool and these two tools are all spoke shaves. So they come with flat bottoms and curved bottoms. The curved bottom is going to fit nicely into that curve, where the flat bottom one will work nicely on outside curves. This little tool, you're probably not going to have one. This is called a chair double. It's basically a scraper that's built into a spoke shave handle, and this is homemade. So it's convenient, but it's not necessary. Scrapers these little card scrapers, do not underestimate the power of these little scrapers. Very simple, it's just a hardened piece of metal. They have holders for them, and they also come with ones that are radiused. These put a really nice finish on things, a lot less sanding, a lot less dust. These are really good for shaping. For the tip, I struggled a long time until I just resigned to using what's called a rasp. And this is a 4-way rasp you can get at home centers or Woodcraft or Rockler or any of those type of stores. Pretty useful. Regular files will do too, except their teeth are a little thin, so they're good for the final passes. But you can see here, if the focus gets decent, get off the shiny thing, that the teeth here are a little bit beefier, so they don't get clogged up so easily. You can run chalk in the file also, and that acts as a bit of a lubricant, and that helps keep some of the dust from clinging in there, so it stays clean and cuts longer. That's especially important if you're working in metal too, so a little bit of chalk in there will help. All right, so we have this marked up in the center. We're going to take this over and lock it into a vise. I have my vise mounted to my bench. You can have any type of vise that'll hold this, but you want this to be fairly sturdy because you're going to be cutting on this and have only small sections of it stuck in here so that you can access all the way around it. So the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the blade portion here. I'm going to mark off basically based on my hand width. You should mark off based off your width because this is going to be your weapon, right? And so I'm going to put a line that scribes all the way around here that marks off my comfortable grip length plus a little bit. All right, and then the rest is going to be blade length. So once I do that, then I can start using some of the tools here, start defining the blade, and then I can come back later and do shaping on the handle area. Okay. Now we're going to start by refining the profile. So I'm going to be working on this surface. Here's where my line is marked for my handle, where that begins. So this is all blade out this way. I'm going to refine the outside shape of this so that before I work on any profiles or curves or anything like that, I'm working to the shape that I want. If you're forging a knife, you would do something very similar. Before you worry about doing any of your bevels, you would want to refine your profile first. So let's start with that a little bit. Okay, so that's done. That was just a few quick passes with the spoke shave. One thing to note, if you've never used one of these before, it's often very helpful to do a skew cut. So if you look at this, skew means the cutting tool is held at an angle to the work. So it's doing a little less work on that leading edge and peeling wood off this way. All right, so a little easier to go through some of these especially through some of these harder woods, than trying to come straight along here. It also gives you a little more bearing surface on that front edge here, this front edge here, where it's defining the plane of the cut. So if I'm here, it's going to wiggle a lot, right? So here I have a little bit more support because it's longer from where the center of the cutting action is to the first point of contact. So a couple little things that you figure out as you go. All right, now I've obliterated my line here from that cut. That's okay. Before I go to the tip, I'm going to redraw that line in there. So this is why we leave some of this here, so I can remember where those lines are, remember to redraw it in, and keep drawing those references in before I start cutting on either of the sides. Okay, so we can have that nose profile where the Kokikai is roughed in. Right, that's perfect. Doesn't have to be yet. We got a lot more work to do. Just like any other technique, you have to get the basic forms in before you get the refinement that you're eventually going to have. All right. Notice that here's a little chip out at the edge. That's going to happen. All right. Don't worry about that. We still have plenty of meat here. These hardwoods are apt to do that, especially on the edge. There's a lot of forces happening out here, so don't get upset or worried about that just yet, right? So that's not going to be a problem. That's why we always leave a little extra length for things like that. And it's going to come in and get shaped here anyway, right? So, all right, so next I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to work on the convex side here, concave side here, right, where we're going to use the other spoke shave that has a curved bottom. All right, so one thing you may make sure as you're doing this, working that curve, you want to look at the profile of it to see where you need to cut. So I need to take care of that there and make that a little bit more of a smooth transition. So I will go and remind myself of that. Sorry about the wiggly video. Again, use some chalk there to tell me that's where I have to take off more. And if I had to do, say, a little bit more here, I could tell myself that. And how much chalk I leave is a reminder of how much to take off. All right. So we'll do a little bit more refinement. Okay, some more Aikido analogs here. So wood is a natural material, all right? So it has a character to it based on how it grew. So, and it changes along the length of the material. So as this curved up, the grain is meeting the surface of the wood. So that way the flow of the wood is changing as I go along the length of this. Right here, well, if you remember from earlier, there was a knot. Right, so the wood curves around this, right? So we're taking advantage of that, but it also means the wood is changing in direction of how it meets the surface. The tool will cut differently depending on how it is meeting the surface. So at the very end there, when I was cutting this way, it was checking. So in other words, it's skipping and leaving a poor surface finish and digging in more than I wanted to. So I actually ended up having to turn the tool around and work this way, all right? So where I could come up from here, I had to turn it around to get a better surface finish here. And you're going to find that. So if the tool is fighting you, it's telling you something. So just like when we're doing a throw, if uke is resisting, right, you're probably trying to put them in a direction that they're not naturally want to go. We call that jun, right? Which way is their freedom of motion, right? So their natural bend of their body, the way their energy wants to go. We want to go with that as opposed to against it. So a lot of analogs in woodworking versus our throws. All right, so we have this roughed out. Now what I'm going to start doing is, since I have a profile that's in pretty good shape, I can start coming in on the top here and putting in a more defined kind of chamfer that goes along here that's going to give me my thin top here and some beveled sides that are thick, right? So we're kind of used to seeing on the back of the blade. If I look at our example piece, you can see there's that top chamfer on that you'll see in various ways, flavors as you look at different weapons from different makers and different manufacturers. All right. Okay, so we have our first bevel roughed in there. Looking straight on, you can kind of see it there. The other side is not done yet. I also took my compass and scribed a line along the side as a guideline. That's my stopping point. It's better to go slow on this, so take off as little material as possible. You're going to, at first, so you can get the general shape, and then you can adjust it to how it looks, and your aesthetic for the piece may change as you go through the process, right? So don't get, just like a throw, don't get trapped by what you think the throw should be, right? So the throw should just happen. A lot of times in the wood here, the weapon has to just happen too. So you're going to find the weapon inside this piece of wood, just like you're going to find a throw during an attack. Okay. So we have our bevels roughed in on both sides. Try to keep that fairly even. So sight down the center of it like this, so you can kind of see where this is. Right. So if this line is longer than that line, you need to adjust. And take note that too, if this line is falling off here, like, because you're going to tend to roll over edges a little bit, that doesn't fool you, right? So this very edge here isn't necessarily representative of the entire surface, right? So that's going to change a little bit just because it's going to roll off. And since it's near the end, that's going to happen. Learn to live with it. And because it's not going to matter right at the end, because you're going to fix that. So, all right, so now that our back is roughed in here, we can flip over to the other side. Note, again, I redraw in my center lines all the time so that I have reference lines to work from. So here's another tool that's quite useful. These are fairly inexpensive. These are little kind of entry-level Japanese planes that you can get. They stay really sharp for the money. These are like, you know, $30-35 or something like that. They are exceptionally good quality, made from kashi, which is a Japanese white oak. Very good blades, very simple, and a good tool for the beginner. Okay, so see a few quick strokes of that. We have a fairly good shape here already coming out and being defined. It didn't take long. Now, the thing with Japanese planes is you pull them along, so that edge is going to be behind as opposed to pushing them, right? So they act a little differently than Western planes, but they still cut, and sometimes you'll find that to be a little easier to pull along the cut as opposed to being pushing or plowing through the cut like Western planes do. When we do a lot of our technique, we are drawing uke through, right? At the technique, we're pulling them. We find it's a lot easier to pull a string than to push it. So when we make connection to uke through our kotegaishis and nikyos and sankyos and ikkyo techniques, we basically create a connection to their one point, and we can draw through that and connect to their one point, just like you're pulling along the string. So again, some more Aikido analogs. And why are we doing that? Because this is a substitute Aikido class, because everyone's home. All right, so let's continue on. All right, so that's two sides of this completed. All right, so you'll notice that little shiny area right there. I had drawn in just a rough shape of how I wanted the profile of it in this direction to be, so that I could follow that. That was just kind of hand drawn from the edge down to from the point down to the sides here that we planed down to before for the back of it, right? So from this point forward on here, I'm going to switch to what we call those card scrapers, right? So here's one in a holder. These holders are a little bit pricey. I got mine at a estate sale, so didn't quite pay normal prices for it. But these little guys, they're just a little rolled edge on here that you can't even see, but they don't take off a lot of material, so you can really kind of refine shapes pretty nicely. You can get them into little nooks and crannies pretty easily. They will wear on your fingers a little bit because you have to keep them curved like so for them to cut nicely, which is why holders like this were invented, right? So you can turn this screw and it puts that little bias on there, right? So, and you can push these or pull these. You can sharpen or put an edge, a hook edge on any one of these edges too. So pretty versatile tool. So let's go and make some more adjustments to the edge here. Okay, so here's a quick little trick to help you come up and see where this is. On dark woods particularly, it's hard to see where your edges are. I took a piece of chalk and I just rubbed it along the edge here, and I get a good idea of the shape of what's still flat, and I can do some comparisons back and forth in order to tell that I'm even in my cross section. So I want to make sure that I am still good in my profile, because I'm adjusting that whether I want to or not as I go, right? So I got a little bit of a hollow here, so I probably need to work a little more out here, which is kind of natural because this tends to spring a good bit. So your cutting pressure is going in, deflecting this wood. Is not being rigidly held, as rigidly held as it would be down here, right? That beam length is going down like that, right? So Just like when you're doing your throws, if you're trying to throw from far away from you, in other words, your hands are far out ahead of you, they're not as strong, right? So as we keep our hands closer to ourselves, we can exert more force, right? More power into, say, a Kokikai or an Aikido, because it's close to our bodies, right? So same deal, right? Out here, you can see it's flexing a little bit, right? As it cuts, that makes a big difference. And so compensate for it, or bring it a little closer, right? In this case, I can chuck this down a little bit further in the vise because I'm going to be working here. So I'll bring this closer to my 1 point because I'm going to work this point here a little bit more, right? So there we go. We're chucked up a little bit closer in the vise, closer to 1 point. Okay, so we're sneaking up on this shape here. Now, you don't have to own every tool under the sun to do this, but it does make you a better person if you do have more tools. So this is called a profile gauge, and it's just a bunch of pins that you can push down. If you do it evenly, you can see the shape of that piece, right? Now if I move up further a little bit, I can do that again. I can see how that shape is changing as I move towards the tip. And here a little bit farther back. And it's really nice to be able to compare that. Okay, well, am I keeping that shape even? Well, maybe on this side here where that was, it's not quite there. So I need to do a little bit more work right there. So great little tool. They sell plastic ones as well as metal ones. As thin as these little guys are, the little plastic one you see popping up on all the Facebook ads lately as a new invention. Yeah, well, it's not new. Just go get one of these metal ones. They're not very expensive at all. Lowe's has them. Okay, so now we're going to get ready to work on the Kisaki, the tip. So what I've done is I've used this square here to kind of allow me to eyeball a line across here. Then I'm going to work this tip back. So I'm going to take the tip, let's see if I can get a little better focus here, and I'm going to work backwards to here. Now the best tool is that 4-way rasp here to use that, to work on that. So sorry about the seasickness that I'm probably causing in all these videos. So we're going to come in along here and we're going to work from this center line back to those, and we're going to refine that until we like the way that it looks. And if you want to be a sharper point, you can just make your line a little farther back. Okay, so it's probably going to be really hard to see here, but you can see that side's rough in, so it doesn't have to be perfect yet. We're not done. Take your time with it. It's worked up to that line where that was. All right, if you want this to be rounded, what you can do is you can rock the rasp as you're working, so you can put a little bit more rounded. This is right now it's fairly flat, so a little more angular is going to pick up the light a little better. Okay, so we have that fairly decent shape here. You will drive yourself nuts trying to keep that even. All right, so just relax and be patient with it. Another reason to use the finer side of a cutting tool, so that you can sneak up on a cut as opposed to just going straight at it. So a lot of times in our throws, we try to jump ahead to the end, right? And then we're trying to fix something all the way at the end of the throw because it didn't work. And what we really didn't do is we didn't take that little bit of time up front to do something right. And that's where we got to fix things. So a lot of times, you might have to start with a new piece of wood, or you might have to start the throw over because the fix cannot be done at the end. It has to be done at the beginning when it's starting to go wrong, right? So take small increments of Uke's balance, take small little bits of wood. You guys are going to get really tired of all these analogies, but that's what they're here for. All right, we're out of the vise for a few seconds here, just trying to take a general stock of where we are. All right, so we have that stock you formed in there. We have our general edge of our profile for our blade portion. Practice weapons are not meant to be actual cutting implements, so there's no reason to make them extra sharp or thin. You want some mass here anyway to emulate a real weapon, right? So it feels like you have something in your hand anyway. So don't get sucked into having to make them like perfectly, replicating a knife and having them super thin, right? So leave a little bit of meat on them. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work the back side here. So we can do that again with our spoke shapes, all right, and the draw knives and the planes, all right. So far, the only power tool I've used is that bandsaw to make that initial cut go more quickly. So, and that can be done with hand saws and coping saws. So really, there's not a lot of investment in tooling in here, especially if you go yard sale hunting. But right now, there's probably not a lot of yard sales, so good luck with that. All right, so I'm going to go back in the vise. We're going to clamp this end in. I have some wood on the inside of my vise here to help keep from marring the piece, right? You can also put a rag in there or some other piece of leather to help give it some holding power while not crushing it, the fibers of the wood too much. All right, let's get it chucked up and start working on the back end. Okay. You see how it's kind of fighting me that way? So it really wants to be cut in this direction. It may change from end to end, from side to side too. So we're working that profile down. It's okay to do a little bit thinner work down here, right? Remember our grip strength is in our pinky. Think about Nikyo, but that is off a smaller radius, right, than up here. So it's okay to have this taper down a little bit. Now we're going to work it down from this side as well, so don't go overboard. And we don't want to interrupt this flow for aesthetic reasons, this flow right here, right? So having this have too much of an extra scallop there could be a little weird in how that functions, all right? So this side's pretty well done. I may come back and take a little bit more right at the end there, but I'm going to work this side here. So I'm going to switch from my curved one to my flat. Okay, back in the vise, pulling towards me. This also can be used in a skew. In other words, it's at an angle to the work. It's going to want to rock one way or the other, so try to keep that even. And keep an eye on what you're doing so you don't go too far. Gets a point where that curve is a little tough to follow. So that's where I'm going to come in with the other tool, where I can hit just that spot. Okay. Fairly happy with that. We'll flip it around. Go back to our curve tool and hit just the end here. Hopefully this is interesting for you guys. You will need to reposition it in the vise often. Alright, so we have, like the tripod's helping out a little bit. Alright, so we have our rough form here, relatively square along the side there. I'm going to redraw in my center lines. Okay, I have my compass, which I have to reset for my center. 1 second. Okay. We are reset for center approximately. I'm going to run down both sides. I end up getting 2 lines. And since I have 2 lines, one equal distance from either side, I know that in between them is the center. So, and since we haven't worked the thickness of the piece at all, it's still straight, I can still get away with doing that. Alright, so we'll do that on the other side as well. Takes out any error. Oops. Alright, so now we can start working profile and round this up. It'd be a good idea to come along and give yourself a nice little oval on the back here as a reference line to work to. You can use a template if you wanted, or just kind of give yourself a rough oval. That silver's not showing up as well on the end grain here. Okay, the same trick can be used on the top using some chalk. Just rubbed along the edge here to highlight how our profile is coming along. So I need to take a little more on that side here to match that up. Okay, coming along from this side, we're coming along pretty good to the sketch. Right, fairly even. So just got to work a little bit on here. Look down and sight down as you work. So pull and push down so you can keep an eye on this profile. All right, if you're just standing up askew, you're going to probably end up getting too far along. Okay, so and you'll dig a little bit too deep. So we want to make sure that we're fairly even. Try to get some more focus there, and work that a little bit more before we flip around and use the other side. Hit the other side. Okay, we have it flipped around in the vise. We have gone through and again using that wooden plane, that small wooden hand plane, and work that one side. You see there's a lot of facets there. That's okay for right now. Again, we're going to rough shape. We'll come along and do this side next. Here's a nice lesson. So wood is a natural material. Let's get a good focus on this here. Try to get a good focus. Here we go. So this is called checking. Not surprising. We can kind of see how this grain, that dark pattern here, is rising out. So as that got uncovered, it checked out. All right. So there's a fairly deep mark in there. So we'll have to carve that out. So it might get a little thinner back here than we want, but we left a little bit of length, so we can always trim this back so it doesn't look too thin. All right, so always leave yourself a little bit to work with. Okay, so that spot in the wood mostly got out, but it's fairly dry, so I switched over to this rasp here, fairly fine, to refine around that so that I don't risk pulling any more of that material out. I'll probably trim a little bit off the back end here just so it doesn't look quite so pointy. Okay, so earlier we took a look at this special card scraper that just has some radiuses cut into it. I'm going to use that to help refine that shape and leave a little bit of surface finish then that file is capable of reading. Careful you don't take this over too far, you'll start digging in. Got a little bit of material to take off on that other side, so not quite a problem yet. Use the larger radius to get over that sweep at the side. Take your time. We're getting towards the end here. We can switch over to the flat card scraper as well. After establishing a nice, comfortable curve, we're going to hold it. When you have nice long strokes to do, you can use a nice rocking motion like you're doing with Kokikai, right? So pulling back along the entire length will give you a nice, even stroke. Right? When you're roughing, you can probably get away with the short strokes with just your arm. But as you start to get towards your finish, you really want to have nice, long, even passes. Okay. So this is starting to come in. Hopefully a lot of this has been in focus. Okay, so we've worked that a little more with the hand scrapers and looking pretty decent along the top. I want to just come in here a little bit and then refine that surface. And then we can go on to finishing. Alright, so out of the vise for a moment. I'm going to give you a general idea how this is turning out. The man-machine interface here is working out pretty decent. So a nice comfort to it. Got a little thin back here, but that's from that little checkout. It happens, it's natural. So still got plenty up here. I could thin this up and bring the grip a little bit higher, but I think it's pretty decent. Alright, so now we're going to work on refining the Kosaki there. You still got a little bit of filing grooves there, so we'll work those out with the hand scraper and then see what we got. Alright, we're back over at the vise. We're going to run the card scraper up along here to clean up the top side of this. Alright, be careful that we don't overcut and round over the edge here, so I'm going to lift up a little bit. So, kind of like when you're coming back from Funakogi, right? It's going to kind of raise up and put our hands in our pockets, so we're going to raise up a little bit on the back stroke there. And then this is kind of the end of our center line here, right? So we have owned that center line, much like we need to do during technique, owning the center line throughout this process, but we are pretty much done, so we can say goodbye to that center line. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is work the back here as far as forming and shaping goes. The Kosaki is well formed at this point. The profile and shape of the rest of the blade. Just this last section to go. So I'm going to take, because it's very likely that any cutting tool is going to pull and chip that out, and I'll lose material and be really short back here. I'm going to use the rasp to clean this up and use the fairly fine area to put a little bit of a bevel. And I'll probably put a little bit of a back bevel this way from top forward to the bottom, right? So it's going to slant down this way, and it gives a little bit interesting look to it. Okay, so we have the back end formed here. A little bit of marks from the file there. Clean most of them up with the card scraper. But at this point in time, we can pull this out of here and take a look at it. We're probably ready to go to sanding. So I'll give a couple of tips on that here in a sec. Okay, so we're almost done making you seasick from all the camera jostling. But we have our nice, fairly well refined shape. Handle. So now we can go on to sanding. What you want to do here is, again, work up slowly. All right, so we're going to take some sandpaper. We're probably going to start out with maybe 100 grit or 80 grit, then go up to about 150, then 220. Once I get into the 220 range, I'm going to wet the work in between sandings. What that does is cause the grain to pop up a little bit and swell, so any little fraying that's occurring from the sandpaper cutting the wood, that fuzz will get raised up. So the next time you come in with the sanding, it'll take that off and you'll be a lot finer surface. So probably a couple passes at 220 and then go up to maybe 320 and it's probably good at that point. Taking wood up higher, you can, but the luster doesn't last that long. I have taken wood up to a mirror finish. I think this piece here I took up to 320 or maybe 400 with wet sanding. So, all right. Different woods will respond better or worse to sanding. And make sure you wear a respirator or dust mask. They're not just for COVID anymore. You can keep the stuff out of your lungs. Some of these woods are not good for you. All right. Anything that you inhale that's not air is not good for you. But some of these can be particularly bad. Some are in the family of like poison ivies and such. They have something similar to or straight erucinol, which is the oil in poison ivy, which gets you. So things like Padok, or I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, P-A-D, A-U-K or U-A-K. That stuff will get you, and that irritates some people. Not everyone, but it does irritate some people, so be careful the woods you select. I would start off with something like poplar or white oak to get you started. Fairly reasonably expensive or inexpensive woods that are easy to get a hold of. Try to sand along the grain of the wood as best you can. Cutting along the fiber. This will also mute some of the crispness of the edges that we had around here. So they'll wear better a little bit that way, rather than chipping and breaking. Because they're sharp, they'll be a little bit more resilient. The Kosaki is always fun. Take your time, relax. I'm sure you can tell that I'm wearing my proper respiratory gear because you can hear how it's affected my voice. I think it added a tone of sarcasm. I'm not sure. Okay, so that is with 100 grit sandpaper. It's a little fuzzy. It's okay. That's what it's supposed to look like at this point. Now we're going to step up to 220. So sandpaper is not sandpaper is not sandpaper. You get what you pay for. So this Norton 3X stuff is pretty good. There's other stuff that's even better out there, but this is pretty darn good for the availability. This is 220 grit right here. Grano Mu Fino 220, right? So this is pretty good stuff. It handles going around these curves a lot better. Your cheapo sandpaper is just going to fall apart really quickly. the backing of this is pretty good, and it holds on to the grit well. So a decent sandpaper will make a big difference. Yes, you can get sandpaper at Big Lots and some of the discount stores, but make sure it's, actually branded stuff, because you will notice a big difference.
All right, I actually did put my respirator on for this. The 220, the dust is really fine. Now you can actually tell I'm wearing it. You don't need to see my face so you can hear it. So the dust is a lot finer with 220. It stays in the air longer, so when you start tasting it, you definitely want to switch over and have a mask of some sort on.
I got the mask off for a little while so you can actually have a hope of hearing me. Alright, so this is after 220. I have a shop towel here. These are just those blue shop rags, which hold up pretty well, but paper towel will work. Paper towel does leave a lot more fuzz on it though. But you can see how that grain's popping up. I think this is actually walnut. Doesn't have quite the weight to it that the rosewood has. Problem is when you have tons and tons of small pieces of wood around for these projects, it gets mixed together. So anyway, all you gotta do is wet this down. If this is really good, we could probably see a little bit of that fuzz that's on there, and that's that grain popping up. So all you gotta do is let this air dry and go at it again, and then we can step up in grit. Okay, here we are after a few minutes. Surface is dry, ready to go at it and sand it again at 220. This is a good place to practice unbendable arm. And extending through to put pressure on the sandpaper, not jamming it down, extending through right into the thumb, much like it's done in Kiatsu. Kasaki here works nicely to pull the tip across. And again, if you were trying to maintain a very sharp point, you would want to have this backed by something firm. But since muted features is more what I'm going for, backed by the hand is good enough. Okay, I'm going to wet it down, and we'll step up to 320 grit. Figured might as well show you getting wetted down that next time. Definitely a walnut. Let that dry a little bit. Sheet of 320. So it's fairly easy to cut down. Hopefully this stays in focus. Put it over a sharp edge of the table and just pull down. And you have yourself a section that you can fold up. It's a different brand. It's a Gator brand. It's fairly decent. Alright, so first round of sanding with the 320 is done. It's in pretty good shape now. Now we can move on to wet sanding. I'm not sure how the Gator holds up doing wet sanding. Some papers are better than others. Some are made specifically for wet sanding, where you can sand with it wet. And it creates a little slurry on the surface of the sand paper grit that comes off, and the wood fibers that help kind of burnish the edge or the surface. It's holding up quite nicely, actually. Some just fall right apart. This speeds the process along, so you can just keep it wet while you're sanding, as opposed to needing to let it dry. You can see that slurry on there. Maybe. Get the focus a little better. All right. Keep going. Okay, we're back. It's dried off a little bit. We can scan through here. I get a little better focus. So we've gone through up to 400 grit, wet sanded. I've added my little touch mark there. That's a little extra. One more thing we can do is there's a pile of the walnut shavings from this piece. This is useful still. So we're going to go ahead and take this and burnish the wood with itself. So this is equally hard, so it's going to help shine that up a little bit, close up some of the pores. I'll show you that in a second. Basically, just going to grab a handful of this and rub it along the edge, the surface. Okay. Probably see that's picking up the light a lot more just from burnishing it. Get some more of that. A handful of it. Wood turners do this on the lathe to help apply a finish to the work. All right. So I like to use a tung oil finish. You can use a boiled linseed oil as well. This tung oil has been treating me well for, I don't know, about 20 years since I started doing these. So use what you like. You can go all natural and just maybe put a little wax on it and be done too. So let me get ready. I'm going to put some gloves on for this. Okay. It's a little longer to get the button to work with gloves on, but I just brought up some more of that shavings that I can use to rest this on. I'm just using one of those blue shop towels to apply it. With finish, you want to do thin coats. You don't want to put too much on any one pass. Just be gummy and runny. So you can see that's taking it quite well. If I leave it on a flat surface, it might stick to it or make a mark in the finish. I found that just laying it in a bed of the shaving seems to work pretty well. You'd think it would stick to it, but it really doesn't. So all the little many points of contact and it's dry. So this is pretty much it. We'll do a few coats of this finish. And then maybe a little bit of rub down with some fine steel wool. So talking triple or quadruple out steel wool, or a wet cotton cloth, anything to just kind of shine up the surface, and you have yourself a Tanto. Okay, hopefully this has been helpful in the relationship between what we do on the mat and what we can do with those same principles, how we can extend them to daily life. It's been helpful, particularly a piece of daily life that relates back to the mat. So we got a little bit of full circle here. All right, see you next week.